there is a city that shouldn't exist. A city located entirely inside a national park, with pizza shops, cafes, luxury hotels, and pedestrians on the street. But when you look up, you see snow-capped peaks surrounding you on all sides. Behind those peaks are glaciers flowing down into the valleys, creating lakes so turquoise you'd think someone added food coloring. And that's when things start to unravel, because what you're seeing isn't pure nature. This is nature that has been decided upon, designed, and sold. And to understand why, we have to go back more than 100 years, to a moment that no one at the time thought would change the map of Canada forever. But first, let's ask the question everyone overlooks. Why would a government allow a city to exist inside its own national park? What caused a wilderness, millions of years old, to become a place with a fondue restaurant from 1967, $1,000 a night hotels, and $160 per hour boat tours? And more importantly, who decided that? For what reason? And did they have any idea what they were creating? The answer isn't as simple as you might think. If you look at a physical map of North America, you'll see the Rocky Mountains aren't a straight wall of mountains, but a complex system, winding from New Mexico up to Alaska. The part located in the Canadian province of Alberta has a special topographical feature. Deep valleys situated between steep limestone massifs, and within those valleys, glaciers have been sculpting the landscape for millions of years. The result is a series of lakes below the permanent snowline, fed by glacial meltwater. And here's the strangest thing about that turquoise water you see in every picture of Banff. That colour isn't magic. It's not a photo editing effect. As the glaciers move, they grind rock into an ultra-fine powder, so small that it turns the water into a glowing blue mirror under the sun. Geologists call it glacial rock flour, and it's what creates the inimitable colour of Lake Louise, Moraine Lake, and dozens of other lakes in the region. That watercolour is the product of millions of years of geology. But it's also something that is disappearing. But we'll get back to that later. Because first, we need to understand how humans found their way here. To understand this, we have to go back to the year 1883. A group of workers was building the transcontinental Canadian Pacific Railway, one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in Canadian history, when they accidentally discovered a hot spring deep inside a cave in the Bow Valley. The smell of sulfur was strong. Warm water steamed amidst the cold mountains. They didn't know what they had just found, but the Canadian government did. 2 years later, in 1885, the federal government set aside 26 square kilometres around that area and declared it a national reserve. That was the precursor to Banff National Park, and also the birth of Canada's entire national park system. And here's the strangest part. That decision to conserve wasn't driven purely by a love for nature. It was driven by the economics of the railway. The Canadian Pacific Railway had just completed the line connecting Canada's east and west coasts, but they needed passengers to make money. The Banff hot springs were something they could sell. The majestic nature was something they could advertise. The Canadian government agreed to preserve the area, partly because they understood that tourism would support the railway, and the railway would support the nation. In 1888, the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel was built on a hill overlooking the confluence of the Bow and Spray rivers. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a strategy. And from that moment on, Banff was no longer just a wilderness. It became a product. But this is where things get truly complicated. Because when you turn nature into a product, you have to build the infrastructure to sell it. And when you build infrastructure inside a national park, you create a paradox that no one can fully resolve. Banff National Park covers an area of over 6,600 square kilometres. Inside that vast conservation area, the town of Banff is the only populated centre in such a large region. This means that every road into the wilderness passes through Banff. Every traveller wanting to see Lake Louise or Moraine Lake has to pass through the town centre. Everyone needs a place to sleep, a meal to eat, a cup of coffee before a 7 a.m. hike. Geography has turned Banff into the bottleneck of the entire region. And a bottleneck is always where power and money concentrate. But this also leads to an unforeseen consequence. Because Banff is a national park, the federal government controls all construction and development within its boundaries. The town cannot expand. No more houses can be built. The number of hotels cannot be increased at will. Meanwhile, the number of tourists visiting increases every year. When summer arrives, the parking lot at Moraine Lake is full. before 9 in the morning. Lake Louise gets so crowded that a mandatory shuttle bus system has to be organised to prevent cars from overwhelming the small road. Tickets are sold out within 30 seconds. What we're seeing here is a system of supply and demand locked in place by geography. Nature creates beauty. Beauty attracts people. People need infrastructure. But the infrastructure is limited by conservation boundaries. The result is soaring prices, a shortage of hotel rooms, and the experience of nature becoming something you have to book months in advance to even get. And this is Banff's greatest paradox. People come here to escape the hustle and bustle of modern life, but they have to go through all the complexities of modern life just to get there. But if we look closer, we begin to see something even more interesting. Not all of the nature here is equally crowded. Yoho National Park, just to the west, straddling the border between Alberta and British Columbia, is home to the 373-metre Takakar Falls, the second highest waterfall in Canada. Kootenay National Park to the south has Marble Canyon, a limestone gorge with bridges crossing deep chasms. These places are no less majestic than Banff, but they're less famous, less crowded, and therefore offer a completely different experience. So why the disparity? The answer, once again, comes back to the railway. When the Canadian Pacific Railway built its transcontinental route in the late 19th century, they chose to go through the Bow Valley, through Banff, through Lake Louise. Not because it was the most beautiful route, but because it was the most technically feasible path through the Rockies. The other valleys, other lakes, other waterfalls had no railway passing through them. And when the railway decided which places would be accessible, it also decided which places would become known. This is the most important point in this entire story. It's the geography of transportation, not natural geography, that decides who gets to see the beauty. More than 100 years later, that same infrastructure is still shaping the flow of people. Calgary Airport, about an hour and a half's drive from Banff, is the gateway to the entire region. The Trans-Canada Highway runs straight from Calgary into Banff, through Yoho and onto the west. The places located on this main route are seen first. Places that require a turn off the main road, like Takakar Falls with its 13-kilometre side road, are visited by fewer people. The second highest waterfall in Canada, and most tourists don't even know it exists. When you piece it all together, you start to see the real picture behind Banff. This isn't just a story about a beautiful place. This is the story of how an economic decision from 1885 created a system that, today, we can't untangle. Glaciers sculpt the landscape. The landscape draws people to find a way through it. People build a railroad. The railroad creates tourism. Tourism demands infrastructure. Infrastructure is limited by conservation policies. And that conservation policy wasn't originally created to protect nature for its own sake, but to protect the income of a railroad. No one in that chain was entirely wrong, but none of them saw the full consequences. And now, we come to the part that no one wants to talk about. If you look at a photo of the Peyto Glacier from 1902 and compare it to an image from today, you'll clearly see that something has been lost. The glacier has retreated significantly over the past century. Banff's famous turquoise lakes get their colour from the rock flour that comes from the glaciers. As the glaciers melt, the amount of rock flour decreases. When the glaciers disappear, the colour of the water changes. And when the colour of the water changes, the very thing that millions of people come here to see every year also changes. This isn't some distant prediction. This is a process that's happening right now. The turquoise blue of Lake Louise is what draws millions of people every year. The economy of the town of Banff, from its hotels to its restaurants to its tours, is built on the foundation of that colour. If that colour disappears, if the glaciers retreat to the point that there's no longer enough rock flour to create it, then the appeal of this place will change, and the entire economic system built over the last 140 years could collapse. And that raises the final most important question. If you have to book a reservation, buy a ticket, and take a scheduled bus just to get to nature, are you really experiencing nature? Or are you experiencing a managed, pre-packaged version of it? And when that version loses its natural colour, what's left? Those workers sitting in a cave back in 1883, smelling sulphur and looking down at a steaming hot spring, surely had no idea that moment would lay the foundation for one of the most famous national parks in the world. They also had no idea that over a century later, people would have to book a ticket online in a 30-second window just to get a spot to look out at a blue lake. And they certainly had no idea that the blue colour itself was slowly disappearing. When that day comes, Banff won't just lose the colour of its water. It might lose its very reason for being.